I haven't been uploading videos as of late, but to tell you the truth, in the past couple of days in general, I was on my holiday trip and it was a really fun time. Well, for the most part it was. And with the holiday season going right past the E3 announcement, I'm gonna talk about a couple of things that people are really pissed off right after E3. We talked about how the Make America Great Again phrase has pissed off a lot of people. I cannot wait for them to find out about Incredibles 2's Make Superheroes Legal Again, which, by the way, Incredibles 2 was pretty freaking awesome. So with that, we're just gonna talk about the post-E3 shenanigans. E3 has been all about the newest video games, but this one is not about the newest video games. I've already covered that, and I certainly have a lot of hot takes about that. This one is gonna be the stupid controversies that people just decided to get outraged at. Let's start with what you came here for, which is the shakuhachi player and the baka gaijins being really pissed at this person for cultural appropriation. There was a musical performance of a shakuhachi flute played by Cornelius Boots. According to some who have actually tried it, the shakuhachi flute is some of the most difficult musical instrument in the entire world, and he is among one of the very few people who can actually play it. He is recognized as a master of that flute, in fact. He played for a bit in Sony's E3 before the showing of Ghost of Tsushima, confusing but also at the same time mesmerizing everyone who was watching. His performance was impressive, especially considering that the instrument that he was playing is a pretty difficult one to handle. But anonymous Twitter outrage mobs decide to show its ugly face and call out cultural appropriation for a white guy wearing a traditional Japanese outfit playing the shakuhachi in front of many people at Sony's E3.
PlayStation's presentation could have done without the cultural appropriation. Like, there wasn't an Asian classical musician available who could play a bamboo flute. This was right after the dead air time, waiting for everyone to move locations.
Ah, yes, so what we need to do to not offend the culture warriors is to search for someone with the same nationality and origins of one of the most difficult musical instruments that have ever been made on planet Earth. Because if it's a white person playing it, that's just insensitive, forgetting the fact that he can not only play it, but is also a master of it. It reminds me so much of what happened when Marvel's Iron Fist was being talked about. Danny Rand was white, and he was a master of martial arts. He cannot be a martial arts master because he's white, and therefore the person who play him should be Asian, even though the entire point of his character is him being a foreigner. It clearly highlights the soft bigotry of the person in question here. So only Asians can be martial arts masters? Only Asians can play the shakuhachi? So Asians cannot share their culture and let other people to master it because it's cultural appropriation? As someone who is coming from one of the most culturally rich islands in the entire world, I am utterly confused by the idea of cultural appropriation, which from what I've seen is the idea that foreigners cannot steal or master someone else's culture. And by foreigners, we obviously mean white people. I asked pretty much everyone in my family and they're perfectly fine for every tourist to master our musics. In fact, that's pretty freaking amazing considering that even our people lose interest towards our own traditional musics. I am very sure the same thing happens in Japan. There are many people in Japan who aren't interested in their own culture or even knowing about their own culture. And yet we have foreigners who are legitimately interested with their culture. They want to study it, they want to learn it, and there's really nothing wrong with that. In fact, the owners of those cultures embrace them. How the hell can these pompous, entitled, delusional, and downright scumbag cultural warriors think that this is some form of a cultural appropriation? Now forgive me for being a dumb foreigner, but English isn't one of my fortes, so I'm gonna need someone to define appropriation for me. The act of taking something for one's use, typically without the owner's permission, and even then, this doesn't apply to this person because he is a credited master on the instrument and he is hired by Sony, a Japanese company. If I look at the thesaurus of the word appropriation, even harsher words come out. The nicest one being misuse, which does not define this performance as he used the instrument appropriately. I have dealt with arguments of cultural appropriation multiple times, and even to this day, I am utterly confused in why this is wrong or immoral. And you don't even have to mock the culture in question. You can respect the culture, play the instruments appropriately, and still be on the radar of those culture warriors on the basis that, well, you are white. It's utterly ridiculous. And I'm not even white.
Can someone at Sony please explain why you chose not to hire a Japanese performer to wear traditional Japanese wardrobe for a Japanese game? This is extremely offensive to Asian Americans consumers and blatant cultural appropriation. Please explain.
Well, you got a couple of things wrong, most notably that it's an American game that takes place in Japan. And no, Sony doesn't need to explain anything because, you know, they're a Japanese company. Instead, you need to explain why the feelings of Asian Americans specifically that matter the most instead of No, I don't know. The Japanese? Also, I really love how these two comments that I nicked from social media have decided to either block the people who called them out or leave social media entirely. I do not endorse harassment towards these people, but then again, I do not endorse disrespecting other people's culture and being a bigot on the internet. And speaking of bigots,
at E3, video gaming's bigots have lost.
Well, if we're talking about the bigots who make some utterly disrespectful, bigoted, and even in a lot of ways racist comments, then yes, I can agree with this headline. But this headline is talking about other bigots on the internet, and it's not the sorts of bigots that would make you cheer up. The first section talks about Gamergate. It's been 4 goddamn freaking years! You people acknowledge that Gamergate is about ethics in video game journalism, and instead of realizing that you're a bunch of hacks, you decided to play the victim and talk about how much mean comments you get on the internet. Well, boo-hoo! If you don't want to have mean comments thrown at you, maybe stop making mean articles and calling people bigots.
E3 2018, and I'm standing in a makeshift wooden town hall erected by Sony for its bombastic PlayStation Showcase event. Sony's biggest franchise is The Last of Us, a PlayStation exclusive, and a title that many consider to be the finest video game ever made.
Ah, yes, the next E3 shenanigan is how Ellie from The Last of Us 2 trailer is kissing another girl. I personally have no issue with that, which, yes, can be attributed to my own personal bias towards Yuris, although this one is just really not up to my taste. Some people might find that odd, and I get their complaints, but my complaints are not directed to that. The only problem that I have is the rather unfortunate implication that Ellie is thinking about mass genocide when she's kissing that girl. This girl's smelly body, smooth skin, and delicious lips reminded me of that time where I blow the insides of someone's brains. Ellie has been established to be gay or maybe bi since the first game, and again, I have no issue with that. But the writer of this article certainly have issues with people talking about how certain games have been invested with SJW propaganda. Hey, if you're gonna talk about how games have been invested with SJW propaganda, as long as you can use facts and definitive proofs rather than mere conjectures, go ahead. But if your definitive proof is merely the fact that 2 girls kiss on a video game, come on, there's gotta be more than that. Are you gonna scream SJW propaganda merely on that? How about you scream SJW propaganda while citing this dumb tweet from someone in Naughty Dog?
If you're so socially and culturally inept that the option to play a video game as a female gets you all worked up in a frothy nerd rage,
Whoa, wait a second, mate. People are outraged that they have the option to play as a female? I think we're talking about the Battlefield 5 controversy, which in that case, the outrage is not the fact that people can play as a female in a video game, it's the fact that people can play as a female in a World War II video game, which for a lot of people can be really immersion breaking, considering that women do not fight in most of wars in World War II, and only fight in very specific instances. They do fight, just not in the majority of wars. See my last video for more details.
The most cringeworthy aspect of all this crap is the ridiculous narrative that game developers are all held to ransom by the oppressive chokehold of the SJW agenda. Truth, we actually want to make good games, inclusive games, games that disregard your toxic game bro BS.
I'm still rather confused with this statement. I'm very sure that anyone with a gaming platform can play video games just fine. What do you mean by inclusive? And how can you foster an inclusive platform if you're just gonna say screw you to everyone? Anyway, let's go back to the previous article. So the bigots lose because, yay, there are gay people in The Last of Us 2. The sorts of people who make negative comments about the gay people being bad in The Last of Us 2 are either idiots who take too much of the red pill or religious zealots. I have no problem with it personally, but I guess that means that I'm not a bigot.
Sony doesn't stand alone in this. Microsoft with its Xbox also used for one of its biggest titles in the year, Gears 5, to make a statement. For the first time in the franchise, the lead character will be a woman, the ferocious Kate.
Okay, wait a second. Bigots lose because Gears of War 5 features a playable female protagonist? What are they actually arguing? The fact that games have women in them? What sorts of bigots are losing? Like 5 of them on the internet? Or a random blogger on the internet?
It's amazing that Microsoft and the coalition decided to take the most testosterone-driven, male-centric third-person shooter brand on the market and still find some way to inject it with third-wave feminism, wrote the One Angry Gamer blog, decrying the diversity agenda in games.
Oh, One Angry Gamer. I cited you a lot from my sources, and you did source me in a couple of your articles, but I source you on the news rather than the writing because you just cannot help making some ridiculous leaps. Gears of War 5 continues diversity agenda with a female lead. I'm no fan of Gears of War, but didn't the previous games have female characters in the battlefield? Having a female protagonist in a universe where female characters can participate in the battlefield is something to be mad about? And the actual critique is insubstantial. A female becomes the lead of a franchise with established female soldiers, and that is somehow injecting third-wave feminism and part of the millennial progressive agenda. Forgive me for being not as politically aware as you guys are, but I am a gamer, not some ultra-woke red-pill politically aware pundit. I am just your normal everyday consumer who cares about the gameplay, the story, and the characters of these games. If someone comes to me and say that Gears 5 is a feminist propaganda serving the progressive agenda, I really have no idea what to make of that information other than asking the question, yeah, but is the game good? The fact that a game is pushing some sort of an SJW agenda is not good information for me. People kept telling me that Mad Max Fury Road was a feminist propaganda. I watched the film and I thought it kicked freaking ass. Is it feminist propaganda? Who cares? I love this film. It's freaking enjoyable. And yes, I will bash certain entertainment media for pushing agendas like Marvel, for example, or even Star Wars to some extent. But I critique them when they do exist. The inclusion of the female character in Gears 5 makes sense in the universe and the story context. What doesn't make sense is female soldiers in the majority of the battlefields in Battlefield 5. That I can say is the developer pushing diversity agenda, which can be explicitly proven as my last video showed. It's rather depressing to be a developer of any fictional media in 2018. If you make a game with a straight white male protagonist, that's horrendous, that's racist, that is sexist. If you make a game with a gay female protagonist, that's just SJW propaganda. There's absolutely no way for me to please pretty much anyone, so screw it. The next Persona game will be a gay female protagonist who joins Hitler to eradicate the Jews. Anyway, the next E3 shenanigan is from our good old pal Feminist Frequency, a name that hasn't popped up in anyone's radar as of late, and for a good reason. Their videos are just incredibly poor and have terrible arguments, but that doesn't mean that they're not gonna make comments on the recent E3. So they released a statistic that shows the gender breakdowns of games featured at E3 2018. Now, like their last E3 gender breakdown, and yes, they did this on every E3, I'm just gonna take their statistics by their word and conclude that there are about 58% of games where you can play as a female. That's right, more than half of them, because you are counting both the options where you can play as a female and where you can choose either. Now yes, if you combine the males, that would mean 74% of games where you can play as a man, but the real question that should be asked here is, why the hell does all of this matter? Well, the reason why it matters is because women wants attention, or more accurately, Feminist Frequency wants attention, as evidenced by this portion of the article talking about how it's really meaningful that demos on E3 feature the playable female characters on games with multiple choices. The one way for game publishers to win over the trust of Feminist Frequency is if you pay attention to the women. Pay attention to Feminist Frequency. Well, here's your attention from me to you, Feminist Frequency, alongside a good dose of mockery. Another good thing to mock from this ridiculous article is the fact that Feminist Frequency shows a chart of combat versus non-combat games. Why? Well, the paragraph below says that it's not that the combat is bad, it's just to highlight the fact that combat in games is still a prominent solution in solving problems. The widespread normalization and reliance on violence is unfortunate because video games can influence people to think that combat is the only solution. Interesting theory, Feminist Frequency. Do you also think that people make suicidal decisions because video games influence them about the respawn feature? And the last one for this video, but definitely not the last out of the post-E3 shenanigans, was a Ubisoft game being criticized by game journalists for not making any political statement. You know, like the last Ubisoft game being criticized by game journalists for not making any political statement. Why does every game need to make any sort of political statement because it's closely related to something political that happens in the real world? Like I said in my last video, it's because they want video games to be their big megaphone. The justification for this one is quite odd. Check out this interview. I'm not sure if it's the writer or the developer who conflate real-world political statement and in-game political statement. If I wear a shirt that says Imperials suck, that is a political statement in the world of Elder Scrolls. Wearing the American flag can be classified as a political statement, and so is attacking the DC, but it's not necessarily a real-world political statement. The Kotaku article misinterprets what the developer says. The developer says that they're not making any political statement, not that the game doesn't have any political elements. A game can have tons of political elements and still not make any political statements about what's happening in the real world. A great example of this would be the Trails series. And that concludes the post-E3 shenanigans that I can cover on this video. There are still definitely more, but this video has gone long enough and I haven't been uploading as of late, so let this be a way of returning back to schedule.